Hi, I'm Ken Jacobson, and welcome to Top Docs. Today we're talking to director Irene Taylor about her documentary, I Am Celine Dion. Irene is an Academy Award nominated director whose films include Moonlight Sonata, Deafness in Three Movements, Beware the Slender Man, The Final Inch, and Here and Now. Irene Taylor, welcome to Top Docs.
Thank you so much, Ken.
It's great to have you on the pod, and I'm excited to talk to you about I Am Celine Dion, which I loved. It's a portrait of the Canadian-born megastar singer Celine Dion and her struggle to live and sing after being diagnosed with stiff person syndrome, which is a rare neurological disease that eventually forces her to withdraw from performing. I wanted to start by, asking you, sound and music have played a big role in your life and work. What drew you to this project and how did you come to direct it?
Well, I think it was a stroke of luck that I was contacted about actually making this film because, like you say, I have always had a very strong draw towards the human senses. And this film, of course, exists in this world of music that is her music, of which I was really never an uber fan, but I certainly grew up alongside Celine and I tracked her career. I remember all of her hits, but not much more than that. And so this film came to me with a phone call. I did not go and seek it out. I did not know that she was interested in collaborating with a filmmaker, but that is really what happened. And I got a call from a producer who a lot of people in LA love and respect. And she just said, I thought of you because I understand that Celine Dion is ready to make a documentary. And I was a little concerned by that because I've never quite had that kind of a collaborative approach, particularly with someone of her public facing stature as a celebrity. But it was undeniable. And as I went through the process, getting to know her, getting to know her team, that this was a very, very special opportunity. And it's not because I knew she was sick. It's because I could see that she had a genuine openness. And it was early in the pandemic, and she was very quiet. Her presence was very quiet when I would meet with her. And I thought, I think I could really do something with this.
I think that producer, hats off, because this is clearly a really good fit. In terms of at least the final product. I can't speak to the process, but you will be talking about that in this conversation. But like, I think in some ways, celebrity docs, if you want to call them that, to some extent can be looked down upon by the doc field in general. And I think there just has been so many of them in recent years that I understand that people have a certain amount of skepticism about receiving them as really good films. But I always felt your presence as a director throughout this film. This is not a generic portrait of a celebrity. So it's interesting to hear how you came to the project and then what kind of drew you to Celine, just this quietness that you're talking about. It's really interesting.
I think that the relationship during shooting is such a critical piece of the puzzle. And I think, seasoned directors can be in a moment of production and say, yeah, we're here. This is like the nectar of authenticity. Like we're here, we're in it. And then other times you feel there's a veneer. And with Celine, I think her celebrity was not an obstacle, and I presumed it would be. And in fact, it helped because she was so accustomed to the camera. She was so accustomed to it. She and I actually have this one thing in common, which is that when we decide someone is right for the job or someone is right for that partnership or they are the right person at the right place in the right time, then we acknowledge that and we let go and we let them do what they do best. And she wasn't doing much. She was living at home by herself, authentically afraid to go outside other than in her backyard because she didn't want anyone to see her because she was canceling shows. And she was acutely aware how people fly from across the world to go and see her play in Vegas, to perform rather in Vegas. Whereas I was the one who was showing up, and in the beginning, I thought I'd have to navigate, like, how do I get through her home? Like, how much do I just walk through a door? And she made it so much easier for me on the very first day, as we're putting the microphone, as I'm, putting the microphone on her, the lavalier, she said, "You're here. I have invited you here. Don't ask if you can film something, just shoot it. And if you ask me, you're going to ruin it for me. You're going to like get me out of this mindset of just, I'm doing my thing." That is like the greatest gift to say to a verite director, to really give her that license. And she understands the majority of what we film will not make it into the film. She understands that we all have our good days and bad days. She understands that because she's done it before, like she's been followed by cameras enough. So I actually felt like it was a delightful surprise, because most of my film subjects, most of them, the vast majority, are people you've never heard of, or they've even been my own family. And so I thought this was going to be a challenge for me, but in fact, it was something that really just greased the wheels a lot more than I anticipated.
This podcast is supported by Netflix, presenting Chef's Table, nominated for 3 Emmy Awards, including Outstanding Documentary Series, Cinematography, and Music Composition. Forbes says each episode has well-crafted cinematography and moving music, all while being underscored by a compelling storyline and cast that brings it all to life. Praised by Bon Appetit for its beautifully shot visuals of food paired with a story that digs deep into the lives of each chef. Experience the series that changed the way we see food. Chef's Table, for your Emmy consideration, now on Netflix. I wanted to ask about shooting in the house. I'm fascinated with films that take place largely in homes. There's certainly, Grey Gardens, very different film, but that's just a classic film about people and their relationship to a house that they don't leave very often. And I'm not implying that, Celine is eccentric really in any way, but that isn't my point. My point is you in the home, you said you were welcomed there. And yet I'm sure you had to figure out just your own comfort level with being in anybody's home, when the camera's on, when the camera's not on, when you're talking to your crew, when you're figuring out lighting, when you're going outside. Just talk a bit about shooting in Celine's home. And I would also add, it's in Las Vegas, which I think adds another layer, because to me, Vegas is just such an odd place, its own artificial world. You're in the desert. It's probably 1,000,000 degrees out for a lot of these times.
It's funny. I didn't feel like I was in Vegas. We were actually in Lake Las Vegas, which is about probably 30 minutes from the Strip. But the home is kind of my specialty. My first theatrical film that really, I would say, jump-started my theatrical documentary career was Here and Now, which I made about my mother and father and their decision at 65 years old to get cochlear implants and hear sound for the first time, hear music for the first time. That whole film, with the exception of a little bit in the doctor's office, I mean, we were at home and we were deep in this domestic archive of their life and love together. And, my film, Beware the Slender Man, most of that film I shot with the parents of these 2 11-year-old girls who were unfathomably in jail for trying to kill their best friend. And most of that film was in the home. My film, Moonlight Sonata, about my dad's struggle with dementia and my son learning how to play Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, and sort of the confluence of these 3 deaf lives over 3 centuries, they also took place in the home. I've filmed in homes in the mountains of Nepal, and I have filmed in the homes of grown men who are still suffering from like a decade of sexual abuse as children. Like the home is where, if I can get into someone's home, if I can convince them that the home is where we will both be the most relaxed, I give them safeguards. I don't identify their home. I don't get too nosy, but I do just say we will all be more comfortable. And I admit, the director needs to be comfortable too. I needed to cater to Celine in this case because the home is where she would get medical treatments. The home is where she felt safe. The home is where, importantly, she was with her sons, who I think were kind of the only bright light and silver lining through she's still ill, but like this was the depth of her illness where she didn't have a diagnosis yet. When I started filming, I came into her home. She did not have a diagnosis. She just knew that she could not perform. She was having these seizure-like attacks, and she could only describe them to me. And, neither of us had any idea that the film eventually would lead to me being in the room when she had one of these attacks. And again, that was filmed. It looked like she was in some masseuse room, but in fact, it was in her home. It was in one of her homes that she had set up to record a song. And it was all the excitement of getting back into the very thing that she loves most, which is to sing, that made her system very excited. And within 30 minutes, she had one of these attacks. But again, we were in her home. I think that it is both figuratively and literally more quiet in the home. When Celine's a very late riser. So I'd get there at 12 or 1, and sometimes we wouldn't start shooting till 2. And so I would just film artwork in her house. One of my favorite shots in the film is just the gauzy drapery that, looks out, and you can kind of see the desert out there and you kind of see the world out there. But you feel this kind of insular, comforting cocoon that she very much was depending on, I think, at that time. So yeah, some of my favorite behind the scenes pictures of us filming there, we have a handful of pictures of me like sitting on the floor. The floors were just, the house was empty. It was so clean. I would just sit on the floor and let my DP, Nick Midwig, go into a room with her when she was sleeping, when she was taking medication, when she was, putting on the last of a daily outfit of her sweatpants and sneakers and sandals or whatever it was. I often would not join the DP, and I would just sit behind the door on the floor, Indian style, with my director's monitor, because I implicitly trusted my director of photography to just be a fly on the wall, which is what he does very well. And I think in her case, again, her comfort level with the camera, you never saw her. I mean, if you looked at the raw footage of this film, you never catch those moments of her looking to see what we're doing. It's really remarkable. It's remarkable how the home really, I think, made us both the most comfortable.
Yeah, I think it really comes through in the film as well. The film opens after the title card with a video of Celine lying prone on her side. She's being tended to by EMTs, and she's about to be taken away from her home. It's a pretty scary moment. We then hear, news accounts of the announcement that she has stiff person syndrome. Before we go on any further, I had never heard of this before. I'm sure many people have not. What is stiff person syndrome?
So it is a neurological orphan illness. Orphan diseases are, just like a phrase medicine uses for either illnesses that have no name or illnesses that don't have enough research fundamentals that they understand them sufficiently to cure them, or even to have a protocol of care. So this disease for her, I think, was developing for many years, and no one could quite put their finger on it. So over the course of the year that I was with her, she did finally get a diagnosis, which was tremendously relieving for her, but also I just watched her sort of clutching at straws, trying things that the doctors would recommend. So one of the scenes in the film is of her getting this immunotherapy that has, just figuratively speaking, just life force in it, just to give her strength. And the nurse would come once a month to do it, and it would make her tired. And that was my first day filming with her. And like, I filmed her napping, and I just stared at her napping. And I thought, I better leave the room because I don't want her to wake up and I'm in the room with her napping, because it might startle her, you know? But I gave myself that moment. And it wasn't a moment of, oh my goodness, I'm watching Celine Dion nap. It was looking at this body that was just inert. And yet here we were filming it, like 2 minutes of just her laying there. And then I said to Nick, let's go. Because if she opened her eyes, I didn't want her. And of course, she told me I could be there, but it was just one more thing for her to worry about. I did not want to be one more thing for her to worry about, you know. You mentioned how the film begins. There's a little bit of, fun archival interstitial material that I wanted to put at the top of the film, which we drew out of a bin. My editor and I had a bin called Moments of Joy. And they were little 5-second, 20-second, they weren't sound bites. They were visual cinematic moments that either made her heart flutter or made our heart flutter, just like, ah. So the film kind of opens with that. But then when the film really begins is after the title. And I just immediately decided to jump to this clearly iPhone shot vertical scene of her getting tended to by these paramedics. And you're not quite sure who you're looking at, but you're assuming you're probably looking at the subject of the film. And then you hear someone say, Celine, Celine, so you know. But I wanted to do that because I wanted to make it very clear. I wanted to make it declarative at the top of the film in the first 5 minutes. This isn't a retrospective. This is not, it's certainly not a puff piece, but it's like, it is not a retrospective. And I wasn't afraid to also say upfront, declaratively through the cinematics and what I was sharing with you, this is a collaboration. There is no way you can expect a celebrity to open themselves up to that kind of vulnerability, particularly around her appearance and what ended up happening in front of our camera. It would be unreasonable for me to expect, she never asked to see anything, but if she did, like if she wanted to see what her body looked like, what her face looked like when she was in 45 minutes of unconscious seizure, of course I would have shown it to her, and I knew that even before that happened. Like, I knew that if there were moments that she would feel compelled to ask me about, that I would work with her. I would collaborate with her on that. But the funny thing is, she never did. She never saw a thing until I showed her the film. So, I mean, it's kind of surprising. It's a little bit fairy tale in that way. I say from a process standpoint. But of course, I felt, and I think directors of a certain kind of consciousness may have this feeling often, which is when you are following someone through their troubles. We often meet people when we make documentaries in a very difficult time in their life. That's why we're making the documentary when we make it, right? That's the timeliness of it. That's the now of it. And I think in her case, even though I had this, wow, she's so accessible, she's so natural, she's so unmade up, she's so herself. At the same time, I realized that came at tremendous cost to her. I myself was just as happy as much of the world to see her perform at the Olympics. I had no idea. I had no idea that a month after the film would come out, she would be standing on the Eiffel Tower, seen by, I'm bad with numbers, millions of people around the world, crushing it, looking like nothing had ever happened to her. And I can only imagine all of the protocol they had in place, not for while she was performing, but the hour after she performed, that's the danger zone.
Right.
Because her illness, this rare, relatively unknown disease, misunderstood or not well understood disease, it is how the excitability of the emotions, the limbic system, and your whole neurological makeup is shifted when you have, for Celine, this sort of participatory musical moment. Because for her, that is her love, that is her deep love. And so I was very surprised that they did that, that she and her manager decided to do that, because I knew it was risky. And I'm sure, they thought it was risky too.
One thing we learned from the film is she is a risk taker and she's incredibly determined. In light of those things, it makes sense she was willing to try and pulled it off. It's also interesting to speculate if that performance had happened while you were still in the edit,
Mm-hmm.
how you might have used that scene, because that's the triumphal ending that you necessarily didn't have access to because her life wasn't at that point when you finished filming and when you finished making the film. I wanted to go back to that opening scene, the vertical video, because right after it, it says 1 year earlier. And then the
Mm-hmm.
rest of the film is in that run up to, taking us back through that year with clips of her career interspersed. But what's interesting to me about that decision is you're putting the viewer in the position of, okay, the whole rest of my experience watching this movie is leading up to this moment, this crisis. And I
Mm-hmm.
was just curious from your point of view, what were you thinking about as far as the viewer's experience, knowing, okay, I'm putting them in that position in relation to time and in relation to these events leading up to this one
Mm-hmm.
traumatic event?
Well, rightly or wrongly, I think as a director, I was acutely self-aware of what I would call a like-minded viewer. I'm not talking about a Celine fan in Singapore or England or Vegas, or I'm not talking about Celine fans. I knew those people would come to the film regardless. I didn't think about those people because I appreciated them, but I didn't think about them when I was making the film. I thought about a like-minded viewer like myself, who in the first 15, 20 minutes of the film would be wondering, okay, I'm going to check this out. What what exactly is this going to be? What is exactly is this film going to be? And I wanted to use that video to both point you that I'm going to explain this video. I'm going to explain what's going on here, but it's going to, for the next hour and a half, I'm going to explain it to you, hopefully more cinematically than didactically, right? But I also just really wanted to make sure that the film wasn't too pretty. I mean, her home, everything seems so staged, but at the end of the day, she's a woman in her late 50s just living her life. And I really was trying to give it this mix up, not only of the archival footage, which you see dated just because of the texture of the film, and you see her age. She's clearly younger, like when she's a teenager in Paris and all of that. I love it. But I really wanted to just say, this actually has a through line and it's very specific. And I thought that it was the shock factor of it was also important, because the truth is Celine had been not truthful for years with her fans, with her promoters, with people who just wanted the show to go on, right? And she wanted the show to go on. She didn't want to feel like that. So it was also just a way of like jolting us, the audience, into a clear path forward of the next 90 minutes sitting in my seat. At least that's what I hope it did for people. That video actually was not taken by me. It was taken by someone who was in the room. So when the cat was out of the bag, you could say, when she had this 45-minute neurological attack in front of not only my camera, but in front of my 47 millimeter Airy lens, this pristine, immovable, non-zoom lens, and I was 3 feet from her. I had no choice but to frame her like this. I could not get out of the corner. I was the sound person for the whole film, except for the first day. And my cinematographer, the lens was right here, and Celine's face was 2 feet from me. So once that happened, the cat was out of the bag. There was no secrets anymore. She had never kept it secret, but no one really knew how bad it was on my team. Me and my photographer and my producer, we didn't really understand. And I think this then caused this person on her team to say, well, I saw it once too. And I took a movie of it. And I said, would you show it to me? And he said, yeah, I'll show it to you. And then I asked him, could I use it in the film? Once I saw it, I thought, wow, this can help me kind of corral the viewer, like right in the beginning of the film, because I didn't want to lead with that scene. I saved it to the last, 3/4 of the film, the one that we shot.
I mean, the one that you shot is amazing, and I think maybe best for people to just watch, who haven't seen the film, to just watch the film and experience it themselves, maybe rather than talk about it explicitly. But I want to ask one thing about it, which is I love the pacing of this doc. And most docs, I think, pacing sort of speeds up over time. Here we have the opposite situation where there are some really long scenes right toward the end of the film, and two of them really are one extended scene, which you've touched on, which is she's going back into her home studio. We don't know it's her home. It's a weird sort of space with candles, and it looks like a warehouse, but clearly they've got recording equipment and they are recording in there. And she records, and this is the first time I believe she's recorded in like 2 years. So a huge moment. And just what comes out of that, and it's a 2-day ordeal because she tries to record, she records, and then the next day she comes back and listens to it. And then following that is the scene you described where she has ultimately a seizure. What this means as far as the structure of the film is you have these two very long scenes right near the end of the film, which work really well just because they're incredibly dramatic scenes and they're very important as far as showing us what she's going through in the moment. But from your point of view, just can you talk about structuring the film that way and the pacing challenges?
Well, of course, when it comes to tone and pacing, the relationship and rapport with my two editors was critical. I did not have two editors working at the same time. I had one working up until the rough cut, and then another editor who I'd worked a lot with before, who's a documentary editor, work with me from the rough cut to the fine cut, which was really not a big change. There were just some personal reasons why the original editor could take it up to the rough cut, but not after that. My original editor, he's French Canadian, and he wasn't a documentary editor. He had made a documentary, but most of what he did was narratives, mostly French language narratives. He was from Montreal, and he was the one who had the idea, let's have a moments of joy bin. And he really cut the film very instinctively, and he had a cinematic touch that, I'll say it, it was just more sophisticated than I was capable at that time of articulating to him. I just knew whatever you're doing, let's just keep doing it. Just keep doing it. The structure of the film changed a little. The scenes didn't change, but the structure of the film. So it was actually my documentary editor and I who really decided to push all that stuff to the end. And it does slow the film down. But again, if I think of my audience's experience, which is essentially, I want to replicate for them my experience. That's like basically what directing a film is. I have an experience and I want to try to articulate that to you. And hopefully, you know, it's very kind of you to say, I saw you in the film, or I felt you were present in the film. But hopefully you forget mostly that anyone's directing the film and you're just watching something, right? I mean, that's what we would love to believe can happen with our audience. And I knew that by that point in the film, whoever's watching the film at the hour and 10-minute mark, they're in. They're in. They're not going anywhere. And I think those moments, you mentioned the scene where she's recording, you may recall it's 2 different days, or, you know, it's 2 different times. But I would say our shooting ratio for that, if you consolidate, I'm going to guess that's the 2 scenes together of her recording, maybe 8 minutes, 9 minutes total. We shot probably 16 hours. And we could have made 10 good scenes with the outtakes. And each time we made a scene, we could make another good scene with the outtakes. The footage was so good. You hear my voice, thankfully, like twice in the whole thing. Like it just told itself. The story just told itself by that point. And so I really think that while it can be hard in the production moment when you're shooting, particularly for the DP, these long verite moments where you literally are not stopping for 90 minutes, even to put the camera down. You know, the only reason we would stop would be to change a battery. So they can be hard. And we have a very large, my DP and I made a commitment about 5 years ago. We now shoot with a very heavy, airy mini LF with these long prime signature lens. It is not a documentary camera. But thanks to something called the Easy Rig, which is, you know, a vest with this weird, you know, antenna looking thing that comes over your head that can hold the camera. So really you're just like guiding a boulder. Last month I had the opportunity to set boulders in my garden. I mean, 8-ton boulders with my husband who knows how to drive a telehandler. And I was like, this is what it's like when I try to shoot my own Airy Mini LF. I'm holding this massive thing that if you unhooked the metal, the steel cord, I might drop it. Like that's how heavy it is. But the glass, what it does for our film, we never used lights with Celine. We have this one scene where she's admitting to the world, not admitting, she's telling the world she has stiff person syndrome and saying, I have not been truthful. I've actually had this for a long time, but I didn't know what it was called. That scene, there's lights everywhere. There's lights everywhere, right? Because there's a camera crew from some Vegas video team outfit who's there to shoot her Instagram post. So we're filming them, shooting her. And I'm like, wow, we're so lucky. We don't use lights anymore. I haven't used lights in 5 years because the camera has the glass and the lenses to accommodate such a beautiful latitude of light. And like, if I could stand on a soapbox and preach the virtues of making that kind of investment to directors, I really believe in it. I had no business buying a camera that expensive, but I did it. And I have to say it has paid off in spades because sure, maybe I've saved $100,000 in 5 years in gaffer and light charges and like all the other things that I would pay for if I'm lighting things, sure. But most importantly, when my subject is ready, we are ready. We are ready to go at all times. And that is key. That is totally key because then we can just work with what we are given, which is our subject's attention. When we are given that, we want to be ready, right? And secondly, we work with natural light. And it is amazing when we shoot like in the dusk or in a dark room when something gradually is changing. You just up the gain, up the gain, up the gain, and the camera just keeps on giving. It's amazing. So when it comes to the pacing and the tone of the film, this is more about tone, but I really do want to give credit to the technology of this camera and these lenses. They're so pristine. And I felt like as a subject, she deserved that. We didn't need to be rough and tumble with no swish pans in this movie. Even when she was having this attack, if you look at the raw footage, my DP shot the whole thing for 45 minutes in one long take. He never went out of character. He never like ran around to the other side. He gently moved to the other side. And Celine never asked to see the raw footage. I thought that would have been a reasonable question, but she never did.
And it certainly your technology and your adeptness at using it and your teams is probably one reason why, in the midst of the seizure, her sports medicine therapist, this guy named Terrell, who's I think seemed incredible, at least in the film, what a guy, but he asks about the cameras and whether we should ask basically
Yep.
you guys to leave. And she kind of lifts her head up and says it's okay. So obviously she felt so comfortable with you at this
Mhm.
point that even in the midst of this physical crisis, she's okay with you being there.
I'd like to give credit to one of the producers of the film. His name is Tom Mackay. He was at the helm at Sony. When I showed Celine the film, I also showed it to Tom. And Tom was the person who I called the night I got back to my Airbnb with my team after we shot. I'm just going to call it the seizure. It's not a seizure technically, but, and I was upset. I was upset. And I had a lot of adrenaline, having trouble winding down. He was kind of what I would call an editorial confidant. Every director needs one or two of those in the film. When I showed him the rough cut, he had one comment, which was, Irene, I remember that night you called me when that moment happened. And I remember you telling me how relieved you were that the therapist asked her if it was okay the cameras were in the room because you were nervous that you were doing it at all, but you were convicted that she would have wanted you to do that. I remember that. But did that by chance get recorded? And I said, I'm not sure. So I went back and I looked at the raw footage again and I really listened for that moment. And sure enough, it was there, but it was like on another channel of audio that I didn't hear at the time because his lav was picking up music in the room. So we turned it down and I missed it. Isn't that amazing? I missed it. And he said, you might want to try putting that back in. If you have it, you might want to try putting that in because this scene may really shock people and they may wonder why you're filming it. And I said, that's fair. Because I wondered why I was filming it. You know what I mean? So I think in the end, that was one of those little wise nuggets that I I don't know, I'd like to think maybe I would have come up with it myself. But the truth is, sometimes that little person, that wise voice, or literally an outsider, a partner, part of my close inner cadre of editorial, my cohort, helped me understand that. Particularly when I've made films about my family, when I made Here and Now and when I made Moonlight Sonata, in both of those films, I am with people, namely my father, my mother, my son, my own child who is not making informed consent choices. I am with them for very unpleasant moments. I think a lot about that. I don't take it for granted. You know, my son from Moonlight Sonata, who was 11 at the time, and part of the film, I tell you the story of his deafness developing as a toddler, as a young child. And you see him like physically suffering. You see him just sort of psychically suffering as a child. I can talk to him about it now. He's 19. And
Wow.
I said to him, I can't even say thank you for trusting me. I was your mother. You don't know any other way, but your mom, if she, is doing this, he just like would go along with it. And he was so used to the camera. But it's really important for me to kind of wrestle and reckon with that. Like, I can't just take it for granted, even though I think my son is probably the more problematic one because my parents were informed. They were informed,
Hmm.
conscientious adults. And then when my dad was losing his memory and developing significant dementia, I told my siblings, I said, look, dad is talking to me and he is showing how demented he is in front of the camera. And I don't think he really realizes that I'm filming this and that it's going to go into a movie that has distribution. And I just want to tell you, like, I've thought a lot about it. I am comfortable with it, but this is something that's on the table for discussion. So I've like navigated these things before. And so with Celine, I do think that I had the wind at my back because I had been in this place before. And I think particularly with my son, where I always wondered, is this okay? Is this okay? And I think that's probably a good voice for anyone in the nonfiction universe to be asking themselves, which is why over the course of making the Celine film, I realized I am not ashamed to say that I collaborated with Celine. She
Mm,
did not come in the edit room. She did
yeah.
not ask me to change anything. Like, that's the miracle of all this. But the thing is, and I don't even think it's, oh, because it was good karma. I was good to her, so she was good. It's not even that. It's just there was a certain kind of like cosmic gelling of everything. Like, I do believe I was the right filmmaker because I came by some of these decisions very honestly. I had compromised the people I love the most in my life, putting them on screen. And I did give my parents the chance to see Here and Now. It was the day before we left for Sundance.
Mm.
So it was kind of like the train has left the station, mom and dad, but let me show you the film.
Well, yeah. Celine saying it's okay in my mind is a dual message. One, it's okay that you're here filming, so it's permission. Second, it's as you say, as almost your collaborator, this is important for the film.
Mhm.
This is part of the message of the film. We're here to show the full range of everything that I'm going through that I didn't tell you, my fans, about for all those years. And now you're seeing it all. So, in that sense, it's part of this coming clean process, which really is at the heart and center of the film. So, to me, it's a scene that shows your remarkable skills as a director and your team skills. It also, shows off her remarkable capacity for committing to a message or a quote unquote performance.
Uh-huh.
Not that she's faking, but it is a performance and giving it her all. So,
Mhm. Mhm.
um, as we go out here, I think so much of what I did love about the film is the art of the film, the filmmaking itself, as much as the content. In closing, let's just pick one other thing to close on, which is I loved the juxtapositions between the present day footage of Celine and clips of her career. And I thought many of them were really interesting choices. And it's also interesting that you say, she didn't watch the film at all or asked to see it until it was done. Because I was watching some of those juxtapositions and thinking, this must be very painful for her because the contrast is just stark between where she is now at the time of the filming and these incredible performances over time. I'm just wondering about your final thoughts about just showing us the multiple Celines
Yeah.
and how you came to grips with that.
Yeah, I think maybe I have a good anecdote, which is from the get-go, my editor and I had two questions. One was, are we ever going to play a song in its entirety? That was one. And the second was, how the hell are we going to deal with the Titanic song?
Yep.
How are we going to deal with, you know, my editor, that was like a song that he just heard too many times in his life. And he was like, I can't hear it anymore, you know. So I decided to use the Titanic song twice. The first time is the notable one that I want to mention. And it is when she shocked me. I mean, she shocked me. And my compassion for her was at a premium at this moment when I was interviewing her and she said, crying, I think I was pretty good. And I could tell she meant it. She was really doubting, and she had to convince herself that in this depth of her illness and how crappy she felt every day, her husband's gone, her children are getting to the age where they want to play video games, and she is alone, alone. And I thought that's when I show. That's when I contrast it. And it was so funny because we had so many amazing performance moments, and her Titanic performance moments, they were, I mean, I'm going to guess Celine might say the same thing. Like, we can laugh about it now. She's on the bow of a ship. Like, every concert, no matter if it was in Tokyo or Vegas, she would go out on the bow of the ship and belt her heart out and do her Celine thing. And it was like, that's when I need to juxtapose these two things, because of course you were good. Of course you were good. Even if we look at that now and it's campy, but when we hear it, it's still got it. It's still got the mojo. You know, for me, it does. So anyway, those hard swings, they're hard to live through, but in cinema, they can be really, really meaningful, I think.
And what was the other anecdote?
Oh, just at the end, she was on Carpool Karaoke.
Yep.
They obviously put her up to this,
Yeah.
but they basically asked if she would go out into the lake in the middle of the strip. And truly, they surprised people. And they were out there singing, you know, trying to pretend they were the characters in the film. And so that was the second time. And that one, I timed it hopefully so that you'd get a belly laugh out of that one, just a belly laugh, because it was just so silly. And you see that she is authentically Celine Dion. And I don't mean megastar, I mean goofball. She's a total goofball, you know, and she's like, sure, I'll do that. Like, plenty
Yeah.
of people would not do that. I won't name names, but there are plenty of megastar pop artists who would not do that.
Yeah, and I think the humor in the film is surprising in some ways and refreshing because we don't necessarily think of Celine as being funny, being light, but she definitely has those moments. And I'll just say for folks who haven't seen the film yet, that the warehouse scene is also a pretty light moment and is a lot of fun. Well, Irene, thank you so much for talking about the film. I think you did a terrific job, and it was for those of us who I wouldn't consider myself a Celine Dion fan. This was just a great film, a great portrait, and I came out of it with a huge amount of respect for Celine as well. Congratulations to you on the Emmy nomination, on the film, on your career, and thank you so much for talking with us
So
today.
much. Really interesting conversation. I really appreciate it. It's nice when they're interesting.
Do you have a hidden gem, a documentary you've seen in the past or maybe more recently that you don't think quite gets the attention that it deserves?
You know, I was at IDFA this past fall and I saw this beautiful doc called The Shepherd and the Bear. And it was about a shepherd in the French Pyrenees. And it just completely transported me. I just think that any film that has the ability, documentary or fiction, that has the ability to authentically transport you into someone else's body, into someone else's daily life, is so rare. And I really felt like for 90 minutes, I was just completely on another planet. I think for me as a creative, it was a really helpful exercise and just a total delight.
Thank you for that. And that one happens to be on my watch list. So I'm excited more than ever to watch it now.